Right, so hopefully now you can all hear me. I'll tell you what, and you've got my screen, so that should be good. I'll just wave. Is it everybody happy? You have got me at the moment. Yep, there we go. Okay, so let's make a start for it then. So welcome to this workshop, and the workshop is called Working Towards Any Time, Any Place, Any Device, and is actually a demonstration of the webinar software that has been piloted by the University of Plymouth. The pilot that we've been working on has been part of the curriculum enhancement project, and that was to look at using webinar software for the university. And as a pilot, we have used one particular version, which is called GoToWebinar. So today what we're going to cover is, first of all, I'm just going to spend 5 minutes to just show you from your angle how to use the basics of GoToWebinar. Then Sarah Barnes will give an introduction to webinars in a more general sense. Ed Bolton, who was here earlier, will show you some overview of the research that we've undertaken. And then Dan Metcalf will look at case studies. We will have a quick opportunity between each talk to answer any questions, but if you wish to put them in, which you'll be able to talk, but you can also put them in otherwise. I'll explain that. So you have in front of you a screen with two main parts on it. You have a window which has the presentation, or is showing the screen that I'm showing, and then you also have a flyout window which is part of the program itself. This is, in your case, is a much cut down version of the version that we as presenters have, and you'll see that later on when Sarah shows you. But for the moment, let me just show you through. On the top part of it, you have two parts. The first part with the arrow just means that you can push this, and actually that will close it out of the screen if you wish. And you can also choose whether to use telephone or a mic and speakers, and we'll show you whether your microphone is muted. Now, for the majority of the time, we will keep you muted because you're listening to us. But we will, if you want to, we can allow you to speak, and I'll show you how to do that. At the end of each question, there will be the opportunity to ask questions. At the end of each presentation, there will be the opportunity to ask questions. And in time-honored fashion, I will ask you to raise your hand if you have got anything to say at that stage, in which case you can raise your hand there. So first of all, I'm going to start off by giving a poll and just trying to find out what your experience is of polls. So let's just get that up. And you should have that now. So if you could now just select one of the following as your experience of webinars. We're almost there. Must be one person who hasn't voted, I think. But okay, well, let's leave it like that for the moment. And we'll close that and share the results. So we can see that about half the people here have either been not involved at all or just occasionally. So we can tell that you are basically beginners to it. So I'm going to hide that now and then go on to the next step. Oh, I'm getting lost now. To Sarah Barnes, who's going to give an introduction to webinars. So let's just turn her over to her. So Sarah, can you hear me yet? Let's just, sorry, there we go. Try again.
Thank you, Ed. That's brilliant. So what we're going to have a look at now, and I'll just bring this up on the screen, is why use webinars. So a little bit of introductory information about webinars. So what exactly is a webinar? Well, a webinar is short for web-based seminar. It could be a presentation, it could be a lecture, it could be a workshop or a seminar that's transmitted over the web. One of the things we wanted to bring along to the workshop today was to really bring about the university sort of digital strategy. There's some really important sort of information in that, particularly about sort of the learning environment and those sorts of things. And one of the things we brought and put up on the slide here today was about providing an enhanced learning experience through the use of technology and digital solutions by developing learning spaces, both physical and virtual, to support mobile, local and global real-time teaching and learning 24/7. So that's one of the reasons we've been exploring the use of sort of webinars. So I'm going to go through some of the sort of the introductory information. One of the things I just wanted to go through is about basically what are the benefits of using a webinar. So why should I use a webinar? These sorts of things include you can join in anywhere with an internet connection, so it doesn't matter where you're based. As long as you've got an internet connection, you can join in the webinar. You can present to large groups. So for example, if you've got a really large teaching group that doesn't fit in, say, one of the university lecture theatres, or perhaps are dispersed over different areas, you can do a lecture to them. You can present to different audiences, so not just university members, you can invite anybody you like to take part in a webinar. So it could be if you're working with the NHS, external companies, other universities or research partners, you could run a webinar with them. You can access using mobile devices, so again, it doesn't matter, you don't have to have a PC or a Mac or a laptop. You can join in with your iPads, your tablets or your mobile phone. Again, it's really good for dispersed audiences, so distance learning students. Other things you can do is you can record your webinars, and that's something we're doing today, archive them and then make them available so your students can watch them again. And again, it's a really good sort of green communications tool. So obviously both by reducing travel costs for both presenters and participants, it's an environmentally friendly option. So again, if you're inviting people all over the country to take part in a webinar, you can just organise it and have it online. There's also really good sort of features and tools, so you can have things like registration. So if you were doing a conference or a seminar, you can have something on a registration page. And also you can do follow-up evaluation as part of the webinar as well. Just wanted to go through some of the GoToWebinar features, and that obviously that's the program we've been looking at. We've got the ability to, for example, share your screen, and that's something that obviously we're doing at the moment. I'm sharing my screen and my PowerPoint presentation to you. You've also got the ability to give keyboard and mouse to other users. So for example, I can give a keyboard and mouse perhaps to a student if they want to demonstrate something on the screen. We've got things like the questions and answers. So as well as having breaks perhaps for your questions, you've got the questions and answers tools. I've already mentioned about the mobile apps that people can download and use, the ability to record a session. You can change presenter, so that's something we've already demonstrated here today. Ed changed presenter back to me. You can also do things like follow-up evaluation and polls, which Ed's already showed you on. And there's some really good sort of reporting tools that you can use as a follow-up after your webinar. There's also things like drawing tools. So for example, I can actually highlight something on the screen, and I'm just going to bring that up now. So I'm going to just bring up the highlighter pen and actually just draw on the screen. So you've got the ability to use basic sort of drawing tools to highlight things on the screen. So I'm just going to erase all my drawings and just go back to normal drawing mode there. We've also got the ability to chat to staff and attendees. So for example, I can send a message out to all attendees. So I'm just going to click in the chat box down the bottom that I've got here as a presenter, and I'm just going to type in a welcome message. So I'm going to type in welcome to the webinar. And you should see that on the bottom right in your chat window now. So I can send a message out to the entire audience, or as somebody that's presenting the session, I can chat to other staff members so if we need to sort things out in the background. At the moment, we don't have video in GoToWebinar, so it's actually currently in beta testing process. So that's something's going to be available shortly, and we'll obviously let people know when that's available. What some people actually do is actually have a webcam up on the screen and just share their screen so they can actually see the webcam. But the quality isn't always brilliant with that, and actually that's something that's going to come up later in the case studies. So we've had a look at sending a message. the other thing we can do as a presenter is I can actually customize it. So during the session, I can actually go in, for example, I can switch off the attendees list so you can no longer see the attendees list. I can switch on and off the chat, the questions and answers, etc. So it's sort of quite customizable when you're using it as a presenter of a webinar. During the webinar, there's lots of different roles. So for example, the first thing you'd have is an organizer, and that's a person who can schedule and start the webinar, and you can have more than one of those. The next kind of role you might have in a webinar is a presenter, and that's the person who's showing the desktop at the time. So for example, I'm a presenter at the moment showing my PowerPoint presentation here. You can also invite people along as a panelist. So you might have a sort of a subject specialist that you want to invite along as a guest presenter. So it could be somebody, for example, from a research group or from another university that you want to come along and present. And you today are here as attendees, so that's a person who joins in with the webinar with sort of no specific role and limited sort of privileges. So you're all attendees during the webinar session today. The last thing I just wanted to show you on the screen here is obviously you're joining in as an attendee, but I wanted to show you what the organizer sees, and this is just a screenshot of it, and we get a sort of a much bigger control panel on the right hand side there. So we've got things like the timer, I can see the attendance, we've also got the attentiveness. So for example, if a student goes off the webinar, I can actually see that they've sort of disappeared off, whether they've gone off to look at another website. I can see the number of questions waiting to be answered. So if somebody's got stuck and they've put in a question, I can see the number of questions there. I can also see whether anybody's raised their hand. So again, if they've got a problem or a question, I can see that. And I've also got the chat window, so I can send a message out to all attendees, or I can send a message out to the other staff members that are also presenting the session. The last part of my part of the webinar, I just wanted to bring up another poll. So we're just going to load a poll here. And I'm going to bring up the poll that says, will you use webinars in your teaching? So I'm just going to launch that now. And you actually should see that on the screen now. So if you want to have a look at the question there and put in your answer, so whether you would, think about using webinars in your sort of teaching, I'll give you a chance to have a go and fill that in. I can just see the votes coming in. We've got 57% voted there. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds, give everybody a chance to vote. Okay, I think that's nearly everybody. I'm just going to close the poll now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share the results with everybody. So you should see the results actually on the screen now of the poll. And we can see the results that have come in from everybody during the webinar. So that's the end of my session now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change back, and I'm going to change presenter back to Ed Bremner, who's the organizer there.
Unmuted.
Right, I'm back again. So thank you very much for that, Sarah. I wonder whether anybody has any particular questions or things that they would like to bring up now. And if they do, then they could just raise their hand and I'll give them the mic. Otherwise, we'll go on to Ed Bolton. Anybody got any thoughts? Ah, Jill, okay. Let's just, so hopefully now, Jill, you should be able to talk.
Hi, yeah, just quickly, are you able to share the screen with another application? So use different software as a teaching tool at the same time as this?
Yes. Anything you have on your desktop you can display. So
that's right, and that even includes video. Though there have, we have had issues about the quality of video, but basically anything that you can put on the screen, including video, you can play. The only issue might be that if it's something which needs to work in real time, then you might have issues regarding the lag that it takes to get through. Okay.
There's another one.
Muted.
Sorry, Amanda.
Hi,
Hello, yes, I just wondered, it might be mentioned in the case studies, but is there an optimum number of attendees you think that would work for this? Is there too many possibly that you could have? Because I just wondered if it could get a little bit unmanageable if you had lots of attendees.
This is something which Ed will come back to and discuss. So I think
Okay.
I won't answer that at the moment, but we will do that next.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Lee, let's just
I'm interested in looking into the use of this internationally. Is there any sort of indication of what sort of bandwidth it uses?
my understanding.
I can answer that one, Lee.
Oh, go on, yeah.
Sorry, I'll jump in there, Ed. We have had some
please.
testing of people using it abroad, so that's worked successfully, and I'll point that out in some of the case studies. As to the bandwidth it uses, it's very low, and we have actually had connections over 3G on people's mobiles, so it's quite effective and a low sort of bandwidth required.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
Okay.
Great. In which case, what I'm going to do now is hand you over to Ed Bolton for the next presentation. Have you got us, Ed? Well, not yet.
Sorry, I'm just going to... I started talking there.
Hopefully should be with you now.
Yeah. So can
you
hear me, Ed?
Ed?
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. As I said, I'm going to go look at the research. Before actually going with GoToWebinar, we had a look at a number of pieces of software, including Illuminate and Adobe Connect. And all of these products we found have got fairly similar features, as Sarah has outlined in her previous section. One of the features we found is not available within GoToWebinar is the ability for participants to chat with one another. You can see you'll be able to send a message directly to organizers, but you won't be able to have a general chat amongst you. As well as the pedagogy and the ease of use, we're also looking at ways of rolling out this software in a sustainable way, so that you know, whatever ways that people book it and then present it, we're looking at a way that can be done easily. The software is currently still in pilot. This pilot will run over the next academic year. As part of this pilot, we want to find out what features are most wanted by academics when delivering webinars effectively to students, and what sort of interactivities they would want. And obviously we're using GoToWebinar to do that. From this, we will reevaluate the software that will be used. And as mentioned before, as part of the curriculum enhancement project, webinar in some format will be available. It may not be this piece of software, but it might be. But that's why we're having the pilot over the year. So what we're going to do now is just discuss some best practice, and this has gone. This is through testing, and Dan will outline more details in his case studies. But I'm just going to go along what we found, and we see this piece of software as a replacement of the typical lecture, sort of a very one-way communication, so that the lecturer or the presenter will be directly talking to students, and the students can communicate with the lecturer by asking questions, but not with one another. As Ed said, there are two options of which to communicate with the lecturer. The first of which is obviously raising the hand, and then the microphone is given to you, or submitting a question in the chat box. We feel that the questions is a good way of students not feeling intimidated, but by asking what they feel is stupid questions, because only the lecturer will see the questions, and they may end up saying, you know, a lot of students may have the same question they feel is stupid, and you see that the lecturer may have said, oh, I've actually missed this, they didn't grasp this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run a poll to find out in the audience how many students you have in a typical lecture. So if I launch that poll now, I believe that should be up on screen, and you can now vote. Ooh. Lots of people don't have any lectures. Uh, 6% voted. Okay, I think that's going to be everyone. I'm going to close that now. And I'll just share the results so everyone can see that. So it looks like actually 50% don't actually have lectures. That's probably the library staff who's coming. Let me just hide that, get back to the presenters. So for those who don't have as many, I did see that some people had 1 to 25. We sort of also as well have GoToMeeting as well as GoToWebinar, and that can facilitate up to 25 participants in a sort of chat. So this is sort of many-to-many communication. So everyone has the ability to communicate with one another. Also similar features as what you have in Skype. So we'd recommend this obviously running for smaller groups between about 12 and 14. So I'm just going to run another poll to find out if you run seminars, what is the typical seminar size that you have? So that should be running. I don't run seminars. Oh dear. So I can see the votes that are coming in. So actually people run seminars with 25 plus. That's quite interesting. Okay, it's 93%. I'm going to close that now. And I'll show you the results. So I can see the results as they come in. Cool. So all of these statistics that I'm picking up here are going to be made available to the site as well as the recording. So you'll be able to have all these results when you're watching the recording. Okay. We have found through testing there is 2 ways of running the webinar. The first of which is to do it with someone else who's got the subject knowledge, expertise. So what you would have one person speaking, and in the situation that we have now, I have 3 colleagues now who can sit there and monitor the chat as you're asking questions, and I don't need to have to worry about that. And so the questions are being answered that students are providing by the knowledgeable expert, and I can concentrate on delivering the material. Alternatively, the other way of doing it is having planned in regular breaks in your session, so that you say, right, we've completed that section. Does anyone now have any questions? And I'll spend 5 minutes answering the questions. So it's slightly different from a typical lecture. There are some other guidance that we provide. First of all, which is to practice the session a number of times before you run the webinar. It's mainly to familiarize yourself with the webinar software. As you saw, you had a few steps to go through, albeit easy, but to be relaxed with the software. So that enables you to have a good delivery, and when people start raising their hands, you know what to do and how to unmute the microphones and things like that. So just to get yourself familiar with the software, it's good to have a couple of practice sessions. The other thing we'd recommend is starting the sessions around 20 minutes beforehand. This allows people to connect before you actually deliver the material and sort out any technical issues. So you may have people who haven't plugged in the microphone properly, check the sound levels. You can do the thing just before, say, can everyone hear me? Please raise your hands, and you can have everyone raise their hands and say, oh, someone's got a technical issue there. So if you can do this before the session, it won't actually impact on your delivery. If you want to show students video, do not attempt to broadcast video using the software. We have found that sometimes it does it all right, but other times, as Ed mentioned before, that there's a significant lag with the video. So what we recommend is either directing them to the location of the video online, if it's sort of like a YouTube video, or providing the video beforehand. Also, through our testing, we have found using the software in conjunction with live lecture doesn't have good results. Presenters tend to concentrate on the audience that they can see in front of them rather than the one online. You cannot use any of the interactive tools like polls as we've done, because people in the audience can't use them. And if a lecturer refers to something that's not, so if I started referring to stuff in this room, you wouldn't be able to see what I was referring to and probably get lost. So we don't recommend it. And the other thing that we recommend is tend to have one speaker at a time. And we can test this now. If I unmute everyone, Let's see how. Let's see. This might take some long time actually. Unmuting everyone, but I can unmute everyone in the room, and we can see what chaos ensues. See, I can already hear an echo coming back. So if everyone could talk at the same time, you can see what.
Hello.
So there we go.
Chaos,
that doesn't work too well. So I'm just going to mute you all there. That's quite convenient. I can't unmute everyone, but I've got a mute all tool. It's very, very, very convenient. That's my section over. So I'm going to hand back to Ed Bremner. So I'm going to make him presenter, and he'll take some questions. So I think that's done. Ed, have you got the presenting tool back?
And I'm now talking as well, so hopefully you've all got that. What I suggest we do, unless anybody has a particular question that is relevant to that, is bearing in mind the time that we go on to Daniel talking about the case studies. So if anybody has a particular question they really would like to say, raise your hand now, but otherwise we'll have another opportunity at the end of Dan's talk. No, okay, thank you very much for that. Let's change over then to Dan. And almost got him. So there, now hopefully you should be able to.
Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. Okay, thanks Ed. So in my section I'll be running through a variety of examples that we've been sort of using in the trial we've been conducting over the past month. And I've got a list there of some of the examples I'll be giving. And I'll also be suggesting other potential uses and hopefully provide you with some inspiration for how you can use webinars in your practice. Okay, so the first example I have for you is that of the delivery of lectures online. This is simply a way of delivering a lecture to up to 500 students with GoToWebinar at one time, from which the attendees can view from the device and location of their choice. Okay, so the first example is that of Alex Nesbitt from the Faculty of Health, Education and Society, who delivered a diabetes lecture for a module which runs over Plymouth and Truro. And this meant that he could reach both sets of students in one go by using GoToWebinar. Over 150 students viewed the webinar live, and it lasted for just over an hour and a half. The process involved in Alex setting up the webinar was first that he approached me suggesting instead of running the lecture twice at Plymouth and Cornwall, it would be better delivered as a webinar. So I explained to Alex the software and helped set up the webinar with him. Alex then invited students to register for the webinar that we set up together, and this was done by email and included a link for the students to join the webinar on the date. Alex had 2 practice sessions at home to familiarize himself with the tool and get used to GoToWebinar. And then the webinar was actually broadcasted here from Roll with my assistants. During the webinar, Alex used a PowerPoint presentation and included regular polls, as we've done today, to sort of add interactivity and get feedback from the students to make sure that they were making sense of the material he was delivering. As Alex didn't have support from an academic, he divided the presentation up to 4 sections and paused between these sections to answer questions from students, much like we've been doing with the raising hands today. And after the webinar, as it was recorded, he posted this on Tulip for students to rewatch if they wished. The findings and feedback from Alex's example were that 77% of all students that were invited to view the webinar watched it live, and that doesn't include those that might have shared a machine. 10% of the students used a Mac, 6 students used an NHS computer, 4 used a Plymouth University machine, and the majority viewed it at home. So you can see there it's been tested on a variety of different sort of machines and locations. The feedback from the student was very positive. 104 students found the session very useful, 6 found it moderately useful, and there was only 1 negative comment. The main feedback comments from the students were that it was very great interactivity. It was very easy to use. The quality of audio was good, and they really liked that you could view it from anywhere and they didn't have to come into campus. The next example I've got for you is delivering content across locations. And so this is a way of delivering a lecture to students in another location. The overview for this one is, due to urgent changes in adult nursing placements, Professor Val Heath needed a way to communicate information with Plymouth and Truro-based students at a similar time. This, as opposed to Val travelling from Plymouth to Truro, which would take over an hour and a half, Val wanted to use GoToWebinar to present the whole lecture, present to the whole lecture theatre in Truro. So the process for this one was that Val booked 2 lecture theatres in Truro and Plymouth and invited students to attend, making them aware it was very important. The webinar was then scheduled for Truro students to run shortly after the Plymouth lecture had ended. So Val delivered the presentation in Plymouth and then made her way back to our office in Roll, where she delivered via GoToWebinar to the lecture theatre in Truro with the speakers and projector in the room. And the session was supported by Caroline Jameson and Lee Marshall in Truro, who took questions and then relayed them back to Val via microphone. Throughout the session, Val showed her webcam so the students could see her to make it more personalised. And the findings and feedback from that one were that it was a very effective way of delivering information across 2 sites in a short period of time. The quality of audio was good. However, there was some negative feedback regarding the quality of the webcam, as it did lag from time to time. Okay, the next example I have for you is that of interactive workshops. And in this example, Professor Ray Jones, among others, have been running various workshops for the Learning for Health project. And these have typically been for between 10 and 50 people and last anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And they're a way of providing information and training to people all over the world. So the process involved for these were that webinars were initially scheduled by the Learning for Health LT, which was Ed Bremner. And Ray Jones did take over this role once he was familiar with the process after being trained by both Ed and Sarah. So once they were set up, registration emails were sent out and a link was posted online for anyone to attend. Ed Bremner would then start the webinars, introduce the session and explain the tool as he's done with you today, and also deal with any problems or questions. The presentation would then be passed to Ray or Benny, who were on a separate machine, and break-off chats would accompany the webinar and be encouraged by the presenter. Again, Ray sometimes would use a webcam to show himself at various points, and during the webinars, polls were used regularly, as well as the chat room to encourage audience interactivity. Again, the webinars were often recorded. So the findings and feedback from the Learning for Health trials were that it was tested on different devices. So we had mobiles, Macs, PCs, and laptops. It was also tested on different locations. So this we had connections from abroad, as I mentioned earlier. Also people viewed on trains, on the NHS network, from work and from home. And it was also tested on different connections, network computers over Wi-Fi, and also, as I said earlier, 3G and mobile data. Feedback was generally positive with good audio quality. And from the perspective of the presenter, Ray was so happy with GoToWebinar that he has since dismantled his own webcasting studio, opting instead to use GoToWebinar. Again, I've got here that concerns were raised with regards to the chat being external, as this could distract the attendee from the webinar. And there was also occasionally a bit of a lag via the webcam that Ray would occasionally use. So this brings me on to the last example I have to you, which is small seminar groups. So this is a way of delivering distance learning so students don't have to come onto campus. And for this example, Professor Heather Skirton has been running a distance learning course with 13 students, and she runs a 2-hour session every week. And Heather uses GoToMeeting rather than GoToWebinar, and this is due to the numbers involved. So there's webcam support offered, which she uses, and also they've got the group chat, meaning that all participants can talk to each other. The process involved in this one was that Heather had used webinar software before, and although it was different from GoToMeeting, she soon learned to use the system using the help offered on the website and with assistance from Sarah. And Heather schedules the sessions herself and invites students to join the webinar each week. And as the webinar runs every week in a fixed 2-hour slot using GoToMeeting, the students have this blocked out in their calendars. Students are invited and encouraged to interact verbally using their microphone during the sessions. And again, they're recorded so that they can watch them at a later date. The findings and feedback from this example are that the students love the sessions and the fact they can join from anywhere. The students have also asked Heather if they can use it amongst themselves for study group and conversations. They like it so much. And Heather, having previously used webinar software, as I've said before, has commented that GoToMeeting is so easy to use that it allowed her to concentrate purely on the academic content rather than the tool itself. I will point out, there was the issue of 2 users who initially had issues on the NHS network. However, this was resolved once they contacted the NHS support desk. I've got on this slide other potential uses of GoToWebinar and GoToMeeting. So they range from training sessions, meetings, conference calls, and student feedback sessions. As part of the demo Ed mentioned earlier, we've also done online streaming, although this isn't recommended as you have, in effect, 2 audiences, the live audience and the one online, and ultimately one, if not both, will suffer by using the webinar software. So just before I hand back to Ed, I'd just like to run a quick poll now, which hopefully you can see. And this is how you think you'll use webinars if you would. So hopefully you can vote on that one now. Okay, I can see the votes coming in there. I think that's most of you voted now. So if I just close the poll, and then I'll share with you the results. So you can see it's quite a mix there of how you'll all use them, which is good. So the examples we've shown are relevant to you all, hopefully. So if I close that poll now, and I'll hand you back to Ed for the remainder of the webinar.
Before you go, Dan, one of the things which I know is always an issue for us, and I just wonder if you could say a few more words on, is just the effectiveness of GoToWebinar with large groups and this inability to actually allow chat amongst the group. And we know that this is available with GoToMeeting, and would seem to me to be one of the big difference and the big advantage to GoToMeeting. But now that we have this experience of using GoToWebinar, what do you feel was the experience of academics in terms of missing or not having that ability to offer their students the ability to chat amongst themselves?
Yeah, sure. So really this depends on how you actually plan to do your webinar. So if you have a small group and want to encourage chat, that's what we recommend, and we therefore recommend you use GoToMeeting. However, if you have a large group of students, to get around the issue of not having the chat amongst them, we sort of recommend that you have an academic assist you who knows the topic well, so that they can deal with prompt students to use the questions panel, as some of you have been using today. And so the assistant can answer those questions and let the main person get on with the lecture. If it is only one person, which isn't recommended, then as Alex did in his example, if you break up your presentation into sections and then just allow questions for 5 minutes in between the sections of your webinar, we find that sort of works very well as well.
Right. Good. I mean, I think that is the important thing. But to my mind, just is the way it's a slightly different tool, GoToWebinar and GoToMeeting for that reason. Okay, I'm just going to swap things.
Sorry,
back
Ed.
over
I just
to
wanted
me
to.
then.
Ed?
So,
Hi.
yeah, go on.
So I just wanted to add something to that.
Whoops, sorry, let me go.
So I said, as part of this testing, as we're running a pilot, if that feature is required, that they have vast amounts of students chatting to one another, then if we feed that back in the pilot, then we can look at alternative softwares that facilitate that. But only if it's required, and if it actually works, then we'd look into maybe different software that could provide that, or ask GoToWebinar to provide that feature.
Yes, no, I think that's a fair point, and maybe one I could throw open to our audience and just ask whether there is anybody there who has a particular thought on that, and if so, whether they'd like to just raise their hand and say something. Sorry, you might have to just raise your hand again. I just dropped everybody's hands. If there's anybody, it doesn't look like there is in which case. Oh no, Lee again. It was you. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I'd just like to report back from Truro that we did actually use some additional chat software to enable chat to be operated in a separate window from GoToWebinar. So that's one possible way around things.
That is, yes. It's a slightly dodgy area because it's not something that we want to encourage. Although I know that it has worked, and I think that Ray found that it worked very well. Hence, there is this discussion about whether it is something that is required in the software or not. Anybody else? In which case, can I throw it open? Is there anybody who has any questions or comments that they would like to ask? Matt.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there are other systems like TitanPad and other sort of online chat things that you can use, but I was kind of wondering, well, if you had like hundreds of people, would you really want them to be chatting away to each other? That might be a bit unmanageable, I'm not sure. So it's just interesting.
I think you're absolutely right, and this is the question, and you know, I have seen it work quite well at times. I mean, I've used Illuminate a lot, which does allow and encourages that communication amongst the attendees, but it tends to be within academics of maybe 20 to 40 people. The idea of having 300 or 400 students chatting amongst each other does become slightly scary. But as you say, this is important for us to kind of work out what it is that we do want, because this is a pilot stage and we have to take it on to work out what the requirements are so that we get the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for like 20, 30 people, for things like that, it's very good to, you know, have those sort of chat at times, depending on what it is.
Okay.
I saw Julie
Lee,
Moody.
you had something to say again.
Yeah, just in response to that, if you do have large numbers of students, then it's very helpful to have someone who will work as a moderator for the discussion that's going on and then feed back specific questions to the presenter, so they filter out some of the chatter that's going on.
Okay, and any other questions do we have? Hello, yes. Joanna. Oh, sorry, no. Joanna.
I think you said that the pilot was going on for this academic year. If staff are interested in using this for next academic year, should they get in contact with you?
Yes. We will be taking, there's a form that we have here for you to fill out. There will also be a form that will be sent to you by email from this system, which you will get tomorrow, which also will allow you to fill out so that we know who you are that wants to use it, and we will be in contact. So I hope that's right. Julie, did you have something? Julie Luxley.
I'm sorry, I've just been putting my hand up and down, haven't I? I've just realised that probably the red arrow means that you put your hand down, and the green one is put it up. Anyway, that aside, I was just going back to the conversation we were having about these large groups. Presumably, you can either have group discussion or not, irrelevant of the size of group.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the facility to choose whether to do it or not is up to you. What the facility that isn't there is the ability to have a person-to-person chat of large sizes, because over 25, this GoToWebinar software, all of the chat has to go through the organizers. So you can drop in questions and we will pick them up and then choose whether to answer them or not. So you can contact us and we can contact you either verbally or by the chat box, but you can't contact another attendee. Whereas in GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting, you can do that. So we could ask you to go, discuss a certain matter, and you could do that.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. I'll put my hand down now.
Muted.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Staff, my colleagues, is there anybody who
Unmuted.
thing they would like to say?
No, thank you all for attending.
No,
Should we
thank
come
you.
back in the room?
Right. Well, shall we all come back? Should we?
Yeah.
Should we stop the recording and all come back in here, and then just have a last few minutes to wind up then?
Yep, that sounds good.